So yeah, like I was telling you before we started recording, I could have used a sports psychologist today. What do you how do you handle a situation when someone's had kind of an off day, or isn't finding much success in their performance, and they're kind of I was in the shower after it and just kind of like, oh, man, just beating myself up over the decisions I was making and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's athletes definitely understand this experience. Sometimes it's the drive home when you're
Hmm.
just sitting there and you're like, man, what did I just do? Like that was a miserable practice. Sometimes it's in the
Hmm.
shower afterwards, or a
Yeah.
little bit further removed from the practice. But the big thing is like there were probably some good moments from that practice, and so trying
Right.
to take those good moments that you had and focus on those, choosing to intentionally dwell on those.
Hmm.
As humans, we have this negativity bias that's built into us.
Hmm.
We tend to focus on and dwell on the negative aspects of our practices or competitions a
Hmm.
little too much, and that doesn't serve us, as competitive athletes. So we've got to work to override that natural instinct, and using things like mindfulness and awareness and attention to choose to focus on the positive aspects. So that's what I would ask you is what went well during that practice,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to really think about that. But yeah, I mean, that answers the question, right? If we were going back and forth, then I'd come up with something. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I get it. Like, it's super important to, you know, just understand the positives and know that the negatives come and go, and you're building off both, really, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the negatives are something to build off of as well. So, um,
exactly.
yeah. Um, So yeah, I'm excited about this one. Today, my guest is Eric Manuel. Get
Yes,
that
sir.
right? All right, sweet. You are a sports psychologist, and you have a practice named Expert Mindset. So I will definitely link all that when I post this podcast. But describe what you do for a living, and who you work with, and kind of what got you into it.
Yeah,
Tell us the whole story.
so first, just a small correction. I'm not a sports psychologist.
Okay, my bad.
So so in order to call yourself a sports psychologist, you have to have a PhD in psychology.
Ah, okay.
I don't. I have a
Mhm.
master's degree in applied sport and exercise psychology. So the term that I refer to myself as is a mental performance consultant or a mental
Okay.
performance coach.
Mhm.
A lot of the clients I work with, they just call me a mindset coach.
Uh-huh.
They can kind of call me whatever they want. I just can't refer to myself as a psychologist or a sports psychologist or a
Okay.
psychiatrist. So yeah, that one small correction, but basically I got into this sport or into this field like most people, as a former athlete. Grew up playing a bunch of different sports, football, basketball, baseball, but wrestling was the one that I really got into. And I started wrestling in about the second grade, but by the time I got to high school, I was pretty much solely focused on wrestling. And, I had the season in the winter, but then in the off season, I was getting, sometimes three times as many matches as I would in the regular season. So I was wrestling a lot and had some success. I was a state champion, two-time academic All-American. And then I got to the point which a lot of your listeners are probably at where they're making that decision on if they want to compete in college, if they want to continue their career. And for me, I had just burned myself out, and this is something that young athletes deal with a lot, especially when they are sport specific and they're competing in that same sport year round. And that's what I was doing. And just the pressure of the competition and the stress of being turned on, 24/7, 365. It just wore me out to the point to when I graduated high school and I was like, I just can't do this anymore, and I had to just step away from the sport. And that was tough because I wrapped up so much of my identity as a wrestler, and it was really hard to separate myself from that and then have to try to figure out who I was if I wasn't a wrestler.
Right.
So that was a whole, you know, chapter of my life and something that some of your listeners may be able to resonate with. But after that, I went to LSU. I got my degree in psychology. And then after that, I went and got my master's degree in applied sport and exercise psychology at a college in Ireland. So I actually studied abroad for my master's degree. I got that, and then I came back to Louisiana, moved to New Orleans, and
Hmm.
just started up a private practice. And I've been working with athletes here locally, athletes around the country, some athletes in different countries, and just kind of been building it up. And now I'm at the point to where I'm working with youth, high school, college, professional athletes in a variety of different sports. And
Hmm.
it's amazing. I love this field. I love this job because there's so much um, newness to it. It's not the same thing every day. Each athlete presents, unique challenges and kind of a different puzzle to solve. And
Hmm.
I'm very interested in kind of keeping it fresh.
Right.
I always knew I didn't want the normal 9 to 5 job in an office doing the same thing every day. And so
Mhm.
this job is great for me because it keeps me excited and there's always a challenge ahead.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you mentioned is that whole, uh, I've heard it called like identity foreclosure, where you're like, my identity is being a wrestler or being a soccer player. And talk about, the dangers of that. And then like, the way, kind of maybe the way out of it, so to speak.
Yeah. So the main danger is your your success, your self image, your self worth, your self value. All of this stuff becomes so closely tied to your performance on the field or on the court or on the mat, right? And that's dangerous. That means if you win, you feel great about yourself and you feel like I'm a good person. But then if you lose, which is a natural part of sports, you feel bad about yourself and you feel like I'm not a good person because I am a wrestler. I am a soccer player and I don't see any part of my identity outside of this.
Mhm.
And sports come with the ups and the downs. That's always going to be there and that's part of sports and that's what makes sports exciting. But your self-worth and your self-value doesn't have to follow those same ups and downs. You can have a more steady, constant um, view of yourself, and that comes from broadening your identity, and finding aspects of who you are that don't involve sports.
Right.
And some people hear this and say, well, that's not focused enough. I need to be 100% committed, and you can be, but you've also got to appreciate and understand that there's more to you than just the athlete that you are.
Mhm.
You're probably a brother or a sister, a son or a daughter. Maybe you're a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Maybe you have other hobbies that you're interested in or other passions that you have in terms of academic studies and, possible careers that you would want to do when you get older. These are all aspects of your identity that you've got to pay attention to and you've got to acknowledge and appreciate because when you have these inevitable setbacks and adversities that you face, whether it's just losing a game or a match or, a serious one like getting injured, and
Mhm.
having your career come to an end, you've got
Mhm.
to have other aspects of your identity that you can look to and say, no, I'm okay. You know what I mean? Like, I still have my family that loves me. I still have my friends, I still have these other interests that I can go and pursue. Like, my life isn't over. And too often, young athletes get into this like do or die mentality where everything is on the line. And that's just too much. And so, broadening your identity as a young athlete and as an older athlete is super important. And it's something that I don't think is practiced that much.
Right. What, like when you're dealing with clients of yours, how many of them have that issue? Like, I'm sure it's a super common thing. You know, like a lot of them have it, right? Um,
Yeah, mostly the younger ones,
um,
in particular, like high school aged, younger
right.
than high school. Typically, they're a little more free. Maybe they're doing multiple sports, but it's when they get into high school and they start to specialize and they find out like, oh, I'm really good at track. Like
Yeah.
that's where I fit in. And then they
Mhm.
find that area where they fit in, but then they close off the other areas, and they stop building other areas of their life. And so I think the high school, college age is where it tends to be the worst. Once they get a little bit older than that, they start to maybe build families of their own and have other areas of their life that they can look to and find passion and fulfillment in. So it's those middle kind of adolescent years that I've seen, at least in my experience, where this issue pops up the most.
Right. So, I mean, is it like, how do people, um, or how did student athletes, young athletes, how do they kind of counteract that? What are some strategies that how would you counsel someone to sort of, understand who they are, not just what they're doing, not their activity, and identifying with that?
Yeah, it just takes time with self-reflection, and
Mhm.
so that's what a lot of this work is, like I don't have all the answers. My job is to just try to help guide the clients that I work with to find these answers for themselves. So
Mhm.
I would help them with different self-reflection practices to look inward and ask themselves,
Mhm.
like, what do I care about in life? What's important to me? What do I value? What's my purpose in life, maybe outside of being an athlete, and really
Mhm.
starting to ask these questions and explore these areas that maybe they haven't explored ever in their life, because
Right.
they've just been so focused on being an athlete. um, Trying to, instill in them and remind them that they have these other areas of their life, like their family and their friends
Mhm.
and things like that. And so just taking the time to talk about these things, and also explaining to them the potential pitfalls of having your identity too closely tied to who you are as an athlete. Um, just the education bit and the understanding for the athletes, I think
Mhm.
helps them to see, like, okay, I thought this was good. At first I thought it was good for me to go all
Mhm.
in and, like, you know, close everything off. But once they start to understand the potential dangers of it, then they start understanding it more and branching out a little bit. And
Yeah.
um, but it's a little different with each athlete. But yeah, it's a lot of self reflection with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so you also mentioned like not getting too tied into or having your identity within your sport. Kind of that identity foreclosure, really affecting you if you have a setback, and just um, talk about if you do have an injury or something like that. How do you deal with that? How do how does an athlete navigate dealing with setbacks and um, you know kind of rising to that challenge of rehabilitation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah. So first would be, this kind of deeper concept of your identity, and if we've
Mhm.
done the work of helping the athlete understand that they have an identity outside of just who they are as an athlete, then it will just naturally be easier for them to cope with this failure or cope with this adversity that they're
Mhm.
dealing with, right? So that's kind of the first step. Outside of that, there's a lot of other ways that we can help them cope with setbacks, adversities, injuries, things like that. One of the big ones is just
Mhm.
understanding that failure is a part of sports. Like, a
Yep.
lot of athletes really don't understand this, and they have this perfectionistic attitude, right? Where they are holding themselves to this unrealistic standard where they can't make mistakes. And if they make a mistake,
Right.
they're a complete failure. And realistically, all athletes make mistakes. Like, even the greatest
Yep.
athletes of all time, you can watch LeBron James playing a basketball game and he might miss a layup. Now, he knows how to make a layup, but this stuff just happens. Mistakes and failure are part of sports. And when you have that relationship with failure and you understand that this is going to be something I experience, then it becomes a little bit easier to accept. Now, injuries can be a different battle to have. Injuries can be really tough to deal with, but even that doesn't have to be this doom and gloom situation, right? There's
Yeah.
there's always a silver lining, and optimism is a big skill to develop, in terms of your mindset, in terms of sports psychology practice, and so helping them to find that silver lining in each of these situations. And you hear it from a number of athletes when they say things like, yeah, I blew my ACL when I was a junior in high school, but it was the best thing for me,
Mhm.
and this happens time and time again when athletes end up growing and their setbacks end up being like a trampoline that propelled them to another level, right? But this only happens when you have this optimistic mindset and you're being positive and constructive about the situation that you're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to figure out what that is, and it might be, oh, I'm injured here, so now I get to work on developing a different aspect of my game. Now, because maybe I can't get on the field as much, now maybe I'm forced to do extra film study, and I'm deepening my understanding and my IQ of the sport. Maybe because I can't get on the field, I have more time now to invest in the mental side of the game. There's always something that opens up. When one door closes, another opens, and so trying to figure out what that door is when you are faced with an injury like this, and just staying positive and optimistic and reminding yourself like there's something for me to do, even though I physically can't do something, maybe mentally or technically or conceptually I can put in work to try to elevate myself to another level. And then when you come back from that injury, right, now you have the healthy knee and you've got the skills that you've been building. So really
Right.
just trying to help them see that this doesn't put a stop to your development. It might stop your
Yeah.
development in one area, but now you've got more time to develop in other areas, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of helping them create a plan to move forward, right? Athletes love goals, they love plans, they love knowing that they're making progress and taking steps forward. So helping them create that plan to work through their injury and develop even though they're injured helps a lot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's super insightful. Like, I was thinking that as you were talking, like, I even had a young woman on the other day who is an assistant coach at Manhattan College, and she played Division I soccer. She went on to become a pro, but she had a stretch where she was injured, and she's like, I had a decision to make. I could either mope and feel sorry for myself, and be the victim, or grow in my role as a team leader, and that's what she chose to do. And I mean, it, like you said, a trampoline effect. It sprung her into being a coach eventually. So,
Yeah.
um, like it just, one thing leads to another, one opportunity leads to another. So,
Exactly. And she
yeah.
was at a fork in the road there. She could have
Uh
gone
huh.
down two different paths, and those paths lead to very different destinations. Had she
Yeah.
decided to mope and feel sorry for herself and be pessimistic, which is the easy way to go, right? Had she gone down
Mm-hmm.
that road, she wouldn't be the person that she is today. So
Right.
this injury, this setback, created this new path for her that has elevated her life. So that this always happens when there's adversity. You've just got to be able to think clearly and see these opportunities that are popping up because they pop up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, thinking clearly. I guess when you're in the moment there, it's pretty, it can be difficult to think clearly.
Yes.
Um, do you have, like, I don't know, training or just triggers within your mind that say, oh, wait a minute, I'm going down the wrong path here, I need to course correct? Are there things that you coach people to use in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And the underlying skill here is mindfulness, right? And
Mm-hmm.
to me, I view this as the most foundational skill that you can develop in terms of your mindset or in terms of your psychology. Without mindfulness, none of the other skills that I teach and that you can apply in sports psychology, none of them are available to you, right? And so mindfulness is essentially bringing awareness to your thoughts and your emotions in a non-judgmental and in a compassionate way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so at its core, it's awareness or it's attention, right? Awareness of your thoughts, awareness of your emotions. Now, this is huge in sports, right? And it's even bigger in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about here is managing your emotions and managing your thoughts. When, for example, let's say you're dealt with an injury, there are a lot of emotions that come along with that. If you're finding out that you're a junior in high school or a senior in high school and you just blew out your ACL, like there's a lot that comes along with that from an emotional standpoint. If you don't have the skill of mindfulness, you can't navigate those emotions very well, right?
Right.
And you get what I like to refer to as being emotionally hijacked, right? Where the emotions are taking over. And this happens in so many different situations in life and in sports. It's not just dealing with setbacks or injuries, but it's the nerves and the anxiety before a competition. It's the
Mm-hmm.
fear that you might be dealing with before a competition or during a competition. It's the pressure that you might be feeling once it hits the fourth quarter and it's a tie game. Like all of these are different emotions, and a big part of performing at your best is having the skills to be able to manage those emotions, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of athletes don't invest the time to build these skills, but you can. And essentially you just need to build the skill of mindfulness, right?
Hmm.
And so navigating your emotions, navigating your thoughts, this is super important for not just performing but training, getting the most out of your training experience. And in order to practice, you just need to sit and watch your thoughts. It's not a very exciting practice, right? But when you invest the time in doing this for 15, 30 minutes a day, and you start stacking those days on top of each other, you start stacking the weeks on top of each other, you
Hmm.
start getting the benefits and you start increasing your ability to be present in those moments, and
Hmm.
this is like a buzzword right now, presence, I want to be in the moment. And athletes tell me this all the time where they're like, hey coach, like this game, this fight, I really want to be mindful. I really want to be in the moment this fight. I'm like, great, like that's a great idea. Have you ever practiced this? Like do you spend time like intentionally trying to bring yourself back to the moment when you're in training? Because you can't do this in a competition if you haven't practiced it. You've
Right.
got to build up this skill no different than you build up any other skill, right? If a basketball player is telling me, they want to dunk it from the free throw line in this game, it's like, awesome, that'd be sweet. Can you do that though? Like is this something you have the ability to do, or are you just saying you want to do it, right? And I think athletes have this idea that they can just flip a switch and get themselves into the moment, but it's not that easy. You have
Right.
to build up this skill with consistent practice, and practicing mindfulness is the way to do that.
So yeah, talk about like what does that mean? That if I was a 15-year-old, I'd be like, what is this guy talking about, right?
I know.
What do you mean being present? What's mindfulness? Kids are probably smarter than I was when I was 15, but maybe just dive into that a little bit so that we can kind of set the table for that
Yeah,
talk.
absolutely. And there's a ton of research on this, and people might hear it and think it's a little woo woo, but it's gotten out of that stage now, and there's a lot of research that has been done on this,
Hmm.
over the last couple decades, and it is very much rooted in science. There's this amazing book though that I would recommend to all your listeners. I recommend this to almost every client I work with. It's called The Mindful Athlete, and it's written by George Mumford,
Hmm.
and this guy was uh, I don't know if you could call him a sports psychologist, but the mental performance coach that worked with Phil Jackson. So he worked with Michael Jordan and the Bulls when they were winning all their championships, as well as Kobe and Phil and the Lakers when they were winning all their championships. So this
Hmm.
guy has had the ability to not just be around MJ and Kobe, but to help train mindfulness in these
Uh-huh.
athletes. And these are some of the most clutch athletes, in the sport of basketball. So he refers to it as being in the eye of the hurricane. And now for me, living in New Orleans, Louisiana, is a very, easy analogy to understand. But
Right.
in the eye of the hurricane, basically, it's calm. There is no
Right.
rain, right? You can actually see the sun in the eye of the hurricane. But outside that eye, when you're inside the storm, it is chaos. You can't tell which way is up, which way is down. There's thunder, lightning, rain, and that's what it can feel like in a game sometimes. It can feel like you're just getting tossed around in the spin cycle, and you can't like figure out how to control yourself or control the environment. Now, when you practice mindfulness, you start to get yourself into that center, that calm center where the chaos is still going on. The game is still crazy, it's still happening at a fast speed. There's a lot of variables, but you're able to find that peace and quiet and calmness in the center and have the ability to choose your actions, right? As opposed to, like I said before, being emotionally hijacked or just being kind of lost in the sauce. So, I love that analogy of being in the eye of the hurricane. And, as athletes continue to practice their mindfulness, they can hopefully get to this point. Now, if you wanted to practice, right, you could just go on YouTube, type in 10-minute mindfulness meditation, and you'll find, 1,000 different videos to guide you through it. But essentially, what you're doing is in one of the most basic forms, and there's a lot of ways to practice this, but one of the most basic is just awareness of breath practice. And so all you're doing is trying to maintain your focus, your awareness, your attention on your breath, right? And so you could think about your awareness as kind of like a spotlight in the dark, like a flashlight maybe, and you can shine it on a number of different things. Right now, your awareness may be on me and the sounds that I'm making with my mouth. It might be on the way your butt feels as it's sitting in the chair. It may be on the feeling of the air around you. You can bring your attention and your awareness to any of the senses that are going through your experience right now. But with this practice, you practice awareness of breath. And so you try to follow the breath all the way in and all the way out. And inevitably in this practice, you will get distracted. You'll be following the breath and you'll think, oh, what's for dinner after this? Or I got to do some homework later. Let me start thinking about that. Or man, that practice today was crazy. And you start thinking about that. This is normal, right? And this is part of the practice. Now, what you want to do is notice yourself when you've gotten lost in thought, when you've gotten distracted, and refocus your attention back on your breath. Now, every time you do that specific exercise, it's like doing one rep, like one curl in the gym. And you're
Mm-hmm.
building your ability to catch yourself when you're distracted and to refocus. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so what athletes want to do is to be able to shorten that time that it takes to notice that they're distracted. And they want to lengthen the time that they can stay focused or concentrated on that one thing that they're focusing on, which in this example is the breath.
Mm-hmm.
Right. These are super important skills in sports, and one way to refer to it is called next play speed. So how quickly can you get to the next play? If you're a basketball player and you shoot a three and you make it, are you looking at the crowd pumping everybody up, or are you running back on defense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how quickly can you move on? How quickly can you refocus back onto the task at hand? Right? If you're a basketball player and you turn the ball over, are you pouting and hanging your head, or are you again back on defense? Like whether it's a good play or a bad play, you've got to get on to the next one as quickly as possible. And when you practice mindfulness, you increase your ability to do this.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's crucial to like, well, I guess the higher level you get, the better your ability to focus, right? I mean, it's
I would
crucial.
say I would
Yeah.
say the higher level you get, the more important that focus becomes.
Right,
At the
right, right.
lower
Yeah.
levels, you can break focus for a couple seconds and refocus, and maybe nothing bad happens. At the
Mm-hmm.
higher level, especially like I work with a lot of combat sports athletes, UFC fighters, things like that. If they break focus for 1 second, they might get knocked out. They might be asleep the next second.
Right.
Like it becomes very, very important at the high level. Now, that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean that these athletes can do it better. Some of these athletes never train this stuff, at all, right? But it becomes more important. You're just closer to the tip of the spear, so the
Right.
room for error is much smaller at a higher level.
Right. Yeah, I imagine like the the threat of having your head knocked off is
Scary.
it intensifies your focus. Um,
Yep.
it's interesting. Like I'd want to get your thoughts on this. I spoke to a women's lacrosse coach the other day, and she was talking about how she has her players journal prior to um, matches. So that's part of their pregame. She's sat down with every single one of her players and determined what works best for them pre-match, whether it's going to play wall ball, but they all have to go journal, right? And so maybe like delve into why that works, and because it's increasing your mindfulness and focus and kind of setting the table for um, being in the right mindset to perform.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, First off with the pregame routines, like this
Mm-hmm.
is something that all athletes should have, establishing some kind of consistency with what you do before a game, and
Mm-hmm.
athletes are typically pretty good at this with the physical side of it. They know how to get their bodies warmed up, but they don't invest the time, or they don't think about how to get their minds warmed up, how to get themselves into the competitive mindset that's going to allow them to compete at their best. So really
Mm-hmm.
taking time to think about and organize and plan out a pregame routine will
Mm-hmm.
benefit a lot of the athletes listening to this. But in terms of journaling, I love journaling, right? I think journaling is incredible. The problem is journaling can mean a thousand different things. It depends on the specific journaling exercise that you're doing. You could be journaling and writing down three things that you're grateful for. And this
Hmm.
might be something that's beneficial before a game because gratitude acts as, kind of a natural antidote to pressure. If you're feeling grateful for the situation and your opportunity to go compete in this game, what is there to be nervous about?
Right.
Like I'm happy to be here. I'm grateful that I get to play soccer. I love soccer. Like this is amazing. You know, I'm I'm like over the moon. I appreciate this opportunity so much. So maybe that's what they're doing is practicing gratitude beforehand.
Mhm.
It could be a number of different things, and so
Right.
it's hard to know for sure what the journaling practice was. But in general, I think journaling is great. And it's again we talked about self reflection earlier and how it's such a massive skill and important part of this mental journey. And journaling is a big part of that. Just taking the
Right.
time to look inward, and
Yeah.
writing it down as well. That helps so much. And so, yeah, I would recommend to all athletes listening to this to pick up some journaling practice. There's a lot of different journaling exercises you can do, and
Uh-huh.
that's up to y'all to decide which of those you want to
Right.
pursue. But just go get a journal first. That's the first step.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to, guys. There's like this stigma probably for dudes out there. They're
Yeah,
like,
I think
I
it's
got
a
to go
guy
get
or
this pink fuzzy, you
yeah,
know, journal, like like my sister has or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
yeah, with a lock on it.
Right. Yeah, and it's not that. Like you're not. Yeah, well, maybe you are. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, exactly. And all of the different journaling exercises have their own benefits.
Hmm.
For some people, they just might want to do stream of consciousness, where they're just
Hmm.
kind of clearing their mind and they're writing down what they're thinking about. For other
Right.
people, they might want to journal at the end of every day and write down how the day went, kind of like what we talked about at the start with your practice and trying to
Mhm.
pinpoint, what were the good things that happened at practice? What were
Right.
some instances of great effort or improvement? What were the successes I had today? Maybe
Right.
they want to journal at night. Maybe they want to journal in the morning and they want to set their intention for the day and say, all right,
Mhm.
this is my plan for today. I want to focus on this, this, and this. All of these are great practices. It's just up to you to decide which one you want and maybe taking time to self reflect and ask yourself, what do I need? Like what's my biggest weakness right now from a mental standpoint and
Right.
developing a journaling exercise to help that.
Yeah. Um, so let's tie this into a question that I got from. He's a college soccer player.
Cool.
He's in his fifth year, Division One. He's looking to go pro.
Beautiful.
And so his question revolves around getting in the zone, right? And
Yeah.
so, I guess the zone can mean different things for people, but um, obviously, this journaling piece could play into that, but maybe talk about what people are talking about when they say the zone, and you know, how do you get there, and has it I'm sure there's been a ton of research on how to get there, but how do you kind of work towards um, being in the zone, so to speak?
Yes. Yes. It's a great question. And
Hmm.
there has been some research, not a ton, I would say. It's kind of
Uh,
a newer concept in psychology and in sports psychology. What they refer to it as is flow.
yeah.
So being in a flow state or engaging in a flow activity.
Mhm.
And basically what this is being so absorbed, so engaged, so present with the activity that you're doing that you have this feeling that like time is flying by and everything
Mhm.
is just seamless and you are able to make these decisions without hesitation and everything just kind of falls into place perfectly. For a basketball player, maybe it's this feeling that like the rim is massive and I just can't miss, or a
Right.
baseball player, like this feeling that no matter what pitch it is, I just feel like I'm hitting a beach ball and I'm going to hit this thing out of the park. Like really just having that confidence in the moment, but also the presence and the mindfulness to stay engaged. When
Mhm.
you're in flow, you're most likely also in the eye of the hurricane, right?
Right.
And this can be very challenging, right? Most athletes have experienced this, but to maintain flow for the course of a whole game is extremely difficult. So
Right.
sometimes athletes will come into it and then slip out of it. Um, the problem with flow is you can't force yourself into it.
Right.
That by definition is against flow. So trying to get into flow will get you further out of flow. You
Right.
can't make it happen. You have to let it happen, right?
Hmm.
And this is very difficult for athletes because athletes love to control things and they love to think that they have more control than they really do, So one of the things that helps you get into flow is just letting go, and not thinking, but just letting your instincts, letting your training and your preparation take over. And that can be really challenging. That's scary. It's a little vulnerable, but in terms of the research, they found that in order to get into flow, you have to have a high perception of your skills, right? So your confidence has to be high, and you have to feel like I'm the dude. Like I've got the skills. I can take on this challenge, and the challenge
Hmm.
that you're facing has to be high as well, right?
Right.
If you feel like your skills are high, but the challenge is too low, well, you'll be bored,
Right.
right? And if you feel like your skills are too low and the challenge is too high, well, you'll feel like this is out of my depth. Like I can't get there, right?
Right.
So you've got to be facing a tough challenge. And so some competitions, they just don't set the table for flow. If you're going up against a team that you're way better than, you're
Hmm.
probably not going to get into flow because they just don't have the skills to force you into that state,
Right.
right? So you have to both have a high perception of your skills, and the challenge that you're facing has to be high as well.
Hmm.
But essentially, if you want to get into flow, you got to practice mindfulness, because flow happens in the present moment,
Right.
and if you're stuck thinking about the past or thinking about the future, you're not in the moment and you're not in flow. And so
Right.
um, when you are fully engaged, when you are fully present, when you're in the eye of the hurricane, you're most likely also in flow. So if you want to experience this more, practice mindfulness more, and you'll increase the odds that you'll slip into flow. But again, there's no set way to guarantee that you can enter into flow. I wish there was.
Yeah.
All of my athletes would be in flow every single time they compete. It's not that simple. Just like winning isn't in your control ultimately, um, and that's something I'd love to talk about more later. But
Yeah.
um, this is one of those things where you just have to let go. You have to trust in yourself, and you have to try to be in the moment as much as possible. And a lot of
Right.
times when athletes get into flow, they think to themselves, "Oh my God, I think I'm in flow," and boom, just like that, they're out of it.
Over.
You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um, yeah. It's interesting. Like, so people, I don't know if the research has been done, but like, what are people reporting when they're in flow? Like, are they remembering things? Are they kind of like doing things not unconsciously, but kind of below the conscious level? Or what does that look like for them?
exactly. Yeah. So um, things like, feeling like time is flying by, feeling
Hmm.
like there's no resistance or friction, feeling like everything is happening seamlessly, or, in martial arts, like Bruce Lee talks about this and he says, I don't throw the punch throws itself, where
Hmm.
it's like, I didn't even think about this. It just happened. And then afterwards I was like, dang, that was nice. I don't even know
Right.
how that happened,
Yeah.
and that's what it is, because the thoughts are turned down, and so you're kind of getting away from the cognitive part of your brain where you're kind of walking yourself through all these steps, and
Hmm.
you're letting your higher self or your deeper self or your instinctual self take over, right?
Right.
And that self is phenomenal. That
Hmm.
self knows how to do this stuff because it's put in the work, right?
Right.
And when you let that person take over, everything happens quicker. There's the reaction time is slowed down, and you just like improve your ability to make decisive decisions and
Hmm.
respond the way you want. But it's scary to stop thinking. It's scary to let go of these things and to just say, all right, I trust myself. Like that's
Right.
what most athletes struggle with, and most of the time they're wanting to micromanage and say, no, I
Hmm.
can't let go. I need to make sure everything goes okay. No, everything will go okay if you trust in yourself and you trust in your preparation. Everything will
Right.
take care of itself. And when you
Right.
get in your own way, you don't allow flow to take over, right?
Yeah.
And our thinking mind is too slow. Like
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I see he's going this way, okay, I'll go this way. You've just got to let your instincts take over and trust that you've been trained properly.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like I think the first time I ever heard about the zone, so to speak, or being in flow state was Michael Jordan. Um, I mean, he would just have these games where he seemed to literally be unconscious and he was hitting everything. And I guess for a more modern reference, we could talk about Steph Curry and how he hits shots that who even thinks to shoot the shots that he hits, and like is he thinking about that, do you think, or is he just like so confident in himself that he doesn't even think about it?
Yes. So the thinking is happening, right? We're always thinking, right? And some athletes will say this, like, oh yeah, I didn't think at all that competition. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you were thinking, right? If you weren't
Right.
thinking, you'd be dead, right? So you were thinking. The thinking was just happening at a subconscious level,
Right.
right? Again, your awareness, like I talked about with the light, or the spotlight wasn't on your thinking, so it was happening, but it was happening in the dark, right? Your spotlight was on the moment, so you were
Right.
fully engaged in the moment, in the activity that you were taking place with. So that's what happens when they're unconscious, when they're not thinking. They're just not consciously thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course Steph is still thinking in those moments, okay, I think I have a gap here, let me shoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's just not, his awareness isn't on that. His awareness is just in the moment, and he's
Right.
feeling all these things and letting them happen by themselves.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so he has like I would guess like he has so many reps doing these things,
Yeah,
taking these shots that he's, he doesn't really have to think about the actual shot. He just thinks about the moment, like you said.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
Hmm.
Um, all right, let's build into that winning topic, right? Another question that I got, I think we'll move into that.
Yeah,
Um, this actually comes from my son. So they they're playing well, but they're not getting results out of their matches. And so they're losing a little bit. And how do you what kind of mindset can you create for a team that isn't necessarily having success but isn't playing poorly necessarily? You know what I mean? Like they're getting unlucky here and there. They play well through a whole match, and then 1 minute they have a lapse and they lose control of the match, and they end up losing, right? So talk about like dealing with a slump and then building into a more winning mindset, and talk about whatever you want to talk about with winning as well.
yeah. And the big topic that I wanted to bring up here is um, letting go of the outcome, right? And
Mm-hmm.
athletes, especially young athletes, right? They focus way too much on the outcome, right? Instead of focusing on the outcome, what they should be focused on is their process, right? And this is because ultimately the outcome is not in your control. And athletes hate hearing this. I know it. They hate hearing it, but it's true. And they need to accept that. Right. The more you try to deny this and try to control something that's not in your control, the more tension and anxiety you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So instead of trying to control the outcome, accept that you don't control it and let it go and
Mm-hmm.
say, the outcome will be what the outcome will be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to focus on my process, my performance, my attitude, my effort, the things that are in my control. And if I do a good job of focusing on those things, the outcome's going to be what I want more often than not. But if I'm spending the whole game thinking about the outcome, well, now I'm not focusing on my process, and I'm missing the opportunities, or I'm losing the moments as they're happening. And if I keep losing moment after moment because I'm thinking about the end, now I've lost the outcome, right? And it's such a weird concept, and it's so hard for young athletes to understand and really accept. But when you can accept this, you free yourself up from so much fear, because one of the biggest fears that athletes deal with is fear of a certain outcome, fear of
Right.
losing, right? But when you know you don't control the winning or the losing, you start to let go of that fear. And no matter what the outcome is, I can perform. I can go out there and control what's in my control. I can have a good attitude. I can give 100% effort. I can try the whole time, never give up, right? Always look to try to find a way to win. No matter if we're losing 5-0 or 100-0, like I can have a good attitude about it. And when you do that, you'll be proud of yourself no matter the outcome. You can go home and look yourself in the mirror and say, we didn't get it, but we did everything we could, you know,
Right. Mhm.
because athletes, they like almost every athlete can understand this experience of like going out and winning a game or winning a match and then going home and being like, that was terrible. Like I'm not even happy with that performance. Like that was embarrassing. Even though I won, I'm still not satisfied. But yet we tell ourselves all the time that the only thing that matters is winning. Well, this is proof that winning isn't the only thing. If winning
Right.
was the only thing, no athlete would have a problem with that situation, right? But
Right.
this is the common issue with athletes where they'll underperform, they get the win, but they're unhappy. Well, it's because they didn't control what they had the ability to control, right? And on the flip side, you can lose doing the best that you did and still feel proud of yourself. So really, it's not the winning versus the losing that we want. It's the performance. It's the process. And if you can control that process, you can do your part, and whatever happens after that is going to happen. And you can come to terms with that and you can accept that more easily, right? This is something that, one of the greatest coaches of all time, Nick Saban, does an amazing job of, right? He's so focused with his team in Alabama about the process, sticking to the process. He doesn't care that they're winning 40 to nothing. If it's the fourth quarter and he has a guy jump off sides, he's going to be upset because
Yep.
the score doesn't matter. The end result doesn't matter. It's the moment, it's the process. And you've got to hold yourself to a high standard and stay focused on that process because you might be in a game when that moment will be the deciding moment of the game. In this specific situation, it wasn't, but who knows what it's going to be in the future. So holding yourself to a high standard and focusing on the process is something that can be really helpful. And so to kind of bring it back to this college soccer example with the slump and them not getting the outcomes that they want, right? I would ask them to define what is success, like what constitutes a successful performance for them. Is it getting the win or is it performing in a certain way, having certain things happen, like limiting their number of mistakes or turnovers or penalties, doing certain things really well, communicating, passing. What are they looking at? What are their metrics to define success that are within their control? And focusing on those things. And when you focus on those and control those things, you start getting the wins more often. But sometimes you do all those things and you don't get the win. And that's just the way it goes, like maybe the other team was just better. Maybe the ball was just taking weird bounces that day and, it didn't work for y'all. And that's just how it goes sometimes, but if you're focused on your process, it becomes a lot easier. And that's how you get yourself out of the slump, instead of thinking, oh man, we haven't won in 6 games, like we have to win this one. Well, that just adds more pressure. It just makes it harder to win. you
Right.
know you never want to tell yourself you have to win, right?
Right.
You want to win. Of course you want to win. Everybody wants to win, but you don't have to win. As soon as you tell yourself you have to win, now you have the pressure of the world on your shoulders. Now you're not going
Right.
to win, you know?
Right.
So that's another thing athletes struggle with.
Yeah. Um, One thing that may be tied to this, but it's kind of a different topic, but like understanding that you don't have to worry about what other people are like other people's judgments, right? Like how do you kind of frame that away from you and you know not have it be a detriment to your performance? Because like I always wonder like a golfer who steps up and hits a perfect drive in front of thousands of people and in front of millions of people on television. Like I would never be able to do that. But um, like, how do you kind of convince yourself to just be on your own little island and be there with your team, and that's it? What are some? I guess it's a mindfulness thing too, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right. That's why that's the most fundamental skill you can develop, because
yeah,
it really is at the core of all these other mental skills. But what you're talking about is essentially fear of other people's opinions,
Hmm.
and this again has been researched heavily in sports psychology. And when you get somebody who can perform a skill, they can do it really well on their own, but then you put them in front of a crowd of 100 people and they start making mistakes, right? It's because
Right.
of this fear of other people's opinions,
Mhm.
fear of judgment. And so what you have to do in these moments is best you can not focus on those
Mhm.
things, and instead bring your focus back to your process, right?
Right.
If you're a golfer about to tee off, you know how to tee off. You know what I mean? Like, you have a routine that you go through every single time you're hitting drives when you're at the driving range, every single time you play 18. Like, you have a whole process that you go through. Just go through that process. Now,
Right.
what they struggle with most of the time is being able to focus and maintain their focus on that process, because they don't have the mindfulness, right? Their their mind keeps getting pulled to these other things,
Hmm.
these task irrelevant thoughts, these distracting thoughts that are taking them out of the moment and causing them
Hmm.
to underperform. If you
Right.
have the skill of mindfulness, you can notice yourself getting distracted and say, "Oh, hold on. I don't care what these people think about me. I'm just going to focus back on, I know if I want to hit a good ball, I need to be focused right here. So
Right.
I'm going to calm myself down. I'm going to focus my attention on this ball, and I'm going to swing and hit it." It's as simple
Yeah.
as that, right? But we trick ourselves into thinking that the skill has changed. Now that somebody's watching, it's something different. It means something more. It's the
Right.
same thing that you've been doing all day, every day, your whole life, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with shooting free throws at the end of the game when it's a tie game and you got to shoot it to make. It's the same free throw that you've been practicing every day at practice. Just
Yeah.
remind yourself that you know how to do it. You've been here before. Stay focused, stay in the moment, go through your process, and let it
Hmm.
rip. And again, if you're comfortable already and you've already let go of the outcome, you'll understand that sometimes I do everything perfect and it just bounces the wrong way.
Right.
That's the way it goes, you know?
Yeah. It makes me think of, like, you used the word fear earlier. Like, we're anytime you're in a performance based activity, there's fear, right? And being able to deal with it is, again, part of mindfulness. But uh, I guess, again, and it may be the same answer, but, like, how do you kind of compartmentalize your fear and move to a point where, I mean, again, it's the same. I keep answering my own question, kind of, but um, moving past fear and just focusing on your performance. Is there anything different there?
Yeah. So in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
we could talk about fear, but we could also globalize this to more emotions as well, just emotions in
Mm-hmm.
general, whether it's nerves, anxiety, pressure. Sometimes the emotions you're dealing with are like excitement, like I'm too excited.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're too bored or whatever it might be, right? Um, in the moment, right? You're going to need mindfulness to
Mm-hmm.
first recognize and become aware of, hold on, I'm experiencing something right now. I'm experiencing fear, right? Most people don't even have the awareness of this and they get emotionally hijacked and the fear has now taken control, right? Once you're at that point, you're in trouble, you know?
Right.
So you need to have the mindfulness to feel these feelings as they start to arise. And you can have the separation and the space to say, okay, I feel the fear coming on. Why
Mm-hmm.
am I feeling the fear? You start to investigate it. Okay, well, it's because I'm about to walk out and get in a fight with this guy who's been training for 2 months to, kick my butt. Okay,
Right.
well, this is pretty normal, right? And so you start to investigate it and see what it's like, and accepting it, right? This is a
Mm-hmm.
big part, because what you resist persists. And so many athletes think when they feel negative emotions, I've got to suppress them. I've got to bottle them up and pretend like I didn't feel anything. Oh, yeah, coach, I'm good. No, 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 no problems, coach, I'm good. Right? I hear this stuff all the time from athletes. You're not
Yep.
solving the problem. All you're doing is pushing it down, and then 10 minutes later, it's going to come back even stronger. And then you bottle it up and push it down again. And then 10 minutes later, right before the game starts, boom, it comes flooding out. And you're like, oh, crap. I can't even breathe. I can't even walk. I feel terrible. Well, it's
Yep.
because you never allowed yourself to feel that emotion. You never processed it and let it flow through you. You just shoved it down and suppressed it. And now it's to the point to where it's going to overwhelm you. Right.
Right.
So what I always suggest to athletes is accepting the feeling that you're feeling. Right. So in therapy, they call this ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. Right. When you accept this and you allow yourself to feel it, and you have the mindfulness, and you don't have the stickiness of it, but you have the space between yourself and the emotion, you will feel it, but it will come and go because nothing is permanent, right? And so allow yourself to feel it. Okay, I'm feeling fear right now. This is normal. I'm getting ready to compete, but
Mhm.
I trust in myself. I know what I'm doing. I trust in my team. I trust in my coaches. I trust in my preparation. I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all normal. And when you go through that process, before you know it, the fear is gone, and it's not,
Yeah.
it might come back, but it's not going to come back stronger, right? Whereas when you resist it and you bottle it up and you push it down, you're just making it stronger, right? And you're not solving any of the problems. So that's what I would say for in the moment. But then there's also a lot of work that you can do beforehand to work to let go of those fears in the first place. Stuff that we
Right.
talked about before, like detaching yourself from the outcome. When you truly detach yourself from the outcome and you don't care about it, right? Obviously, you care, you want to win, but you don't control it. Well, that
Hmm.
fear of losing, it stops showing up, right? And
Right.
you start to understand, like, if I lose, I lose. If I win, I win. I'm going to go out and perform, you know.
Right.
And then you stop having that fear in the first place. So there's both, strategies for dealing with it or coping with it in the moment, as well as strategies for helping yourself reframe the fear or viewing it from a more positive perspective that's going to help just minimize the intensity of it when it does pop up.
Yeah. Um, there's another guy that I had on here. He was a U.S. national team soccer player. Played over in England in the Premier League, but his name's Jay Demerit, and he like worked his way up. He graduated college, went over to England, and worked his way up from like the lowest division up to the Premier League. And so they were playing in a match that was in the second division, and if they won, they got promoted. Right? That's that whole promotion relegation thing
Oh,
that's
yeah.
in English soccer. But he said that the fans. It was in Wembley, I think, and this massive crowd, and it's loud, and he just said that he has a whole TED talk about it. Like, are you prepared for your sunny day? And like, I deserve to be here, and so like I've earned being here. And you alluded to that earlier, where you're just grateful when you're talking about being grateful and showing gratitude in the moment. Is that I'm sure that there's been a you know there's literature to back it up that if you have that attitude, then you're going to be present. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
So gratitude is a huge skill,
Uh-huh.
and again, this is one that young athletes struggle with the most. Like
Hmm.
typically, they just that age group, they take things for granted. They don't quite understand how good their situation might be, and how much they should appreciate what they have and what they've been given and the life that they were born into. So there's a lot to
Hmm.
be grateful for. And, taking time to practice gratitude will help you to feel gratitude more frequently when you want to, which would be,
Yeah.
before a competition. Again, like we talked about with the mindfulness, if you never practice this, don't expect to be able to do it on competition day.
Right.
Like that
Yeah.
that is just so unrealistic. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, it is massive. Gratitude
Right.
super super helpful, and like I said before, it kind of acts like a natural antidote to pressure. And so practicing, telling yourselves like, man, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to go compete.
Right.
Because there are so many things that could have happened in your life that could have taken you away from this competition, right? We spent some time talking about injuries before. If you're
Right.
competing in this game, you're probably not injured. And so be grateful for that. Be grateful that your body is healthy enough to allow you to compete. Be grateful that your team is good enough that, you've gotten to this stage and now you're competing for a championship or whatever it might be.
Right.
Every opportunity you get to compete and to train. Like these are amazing opportunities because at the end of the day, we're talking about games here. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like we're talking about people playing games. And some
Hmm.
of these people that may be listening are fortunate enough to play games and get paid for it. Like, talk about an amazing opportunity that athletes take for granted sometimes, and they get too wrapped up in, the seriousness and the business side of the sport. But this is a game. This is supposed to be fun. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And when you're grateful for it and when you're focused on joy and fun, you mentioned Steph Curry, he's one of the best at this. When he plays, he's having more fun than anyone on the court. And
Right.
oh, by the way, he's performing better than anyone on the court too.
Yeah.
And so many people think that when you bring fun into the picture, well, now, they're going to start making mistakes. They're not going to be focused and this and that. No, there's a way to balance it out. And when you find that balance, you actually elevate your performance. So
Right.
maintaining joy for the sport, having fun, and being grateful for the opportunities to compete. All this stuff just puts you into this mindset that's going to more often than not send you down a path of higher performance, as opposed to, feeling like I have to win, feeling the stress and the pressure of competition, the seriousness. This is do or die. Everything's on the
Right.
line. If we lose, we go home. Like, all of that stuff just adds pressure, and it feels like you're like walking to the gallows, and it doesn't have to be like that. Like, this can be an enjoyable experience, and when you have it as that, you open yourself up to be in the moment, to get into that flow state more often, and
Mhm.
to get your optimal performance.
Right. Yeah. There's a big sign. I was watching the U.S. Open a few weeks ago, tennis U.S. Open, and there's that big sign, that Billie Jean King quote where it says "Pressure is a privilege." I mean,
Yeah,
what shows more gratitude than that? It's pretty cool. So we're at an hour, but I want to ask you one more thing, and I'm hopeful that we can do this again because this is
absolutely.
tremendous,
Yeah,
interesting.
I got time today as well, so no
Okay.
problem.
So talk about the role of the coach. Like,
Ooh,
when we talk about fear, and, I've heard so many kids talk about the fear of making a mistake. Like, if I make a mistake, the coach is going to jerk me off the field, or they're going to yell at me, or that sort of thing. So talk about the importance of, allowing athletes to make mistakes and giving them that kind of latitude to feel free and confident not worry about making mistakes.
yeah, from the coach's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, I think a lot of these issues come from focusing too much on the outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And coaches do this, just as bad as athletes, right? So if their top priority is winning, well, they don't care about developing their athletes. They don't care about the long-term growth and the potential for them to become, higher level athletes in the future. If you don't cut it, you're out, and we're going to
Right.
find somebody who does a better job, right? And so it becomes very cutthroat and inhumane, and that's not what the best coaches do. Again, we talked about Nick Saban earlier. This guy has an unbelievably high standard of excellency, right? He holds his players accountable, but he also coaches his players. He
Yeah.
also helps his players to become better football players and better men, right? And that's what all coaches should be trying to do. And if you really care about that, growing and developing your athletes, you need to understand that they are going to make mistakes. And that mistake is not a bad thing. That mistake is an opportunity for you to coach them. If
Mm-hmm.
all they're doing is having success, you can't coach them. They're already good. They're already
Yeah.
perfect. They're not making any mistakes. So mistakes from your perspective as a coach, that's an opportunity. You should
Right.
be excited about that. And now this is your chance to help this player elevate their game, deepen their understanding of the situation, because maybe they just didn't understand what was going on. And now you
Right.
can help them learn and become better. Right. And sometimes that means you got to yank them from the game. Like, I'm not saying like never do that, or, like
Right.
discipline isn't necessary or any of that stuff, or accountability. Like, all of this stuff is important, but it doesn't have to come from a punitive perspective or a belittling or a berating, perspective. There needs to be love and genuine care. And there's a saying that I love. which is the athletes, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care,
Right. Yeah.
right? They don't care if you're the best coach in the world and you know everything about this sport if you don't care about them, right? So they
Yeah.
need to know that you care about them. And they learn that by your actions, by what you do to them, what you say to them, how you treat them. And if you're
Right.
treating them like crap, they don't care. They're not going to be able to learn from you because they
Right.
don't have that trust, right?
Right.
So as a coach, like you're really like a sports psychologist,
Right.
whether you want to be or not, that's what you signed up for. So you
Right.
need to learn how to manage the psychology of all of these different athletes on your team. And
Right.
each of them are different. They're all unique. They all have different motivators and different buttons to
Mhm.
push. They all have different things that they care about, different identities, like we talked about, that add to
Mhm.
them and who they are as a person. You have to invest the time to learn these things and
Right.
really care about your team. And now this is work. This is a lot of work, but this is what you signed up for. And if you want to be a good coach, a successful coach, then this is what you need to do. And um, a lot of coaches don't do this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
strictly looking at the X's and the O's, and they're treating it like a business. And um, look, I like in certain industries like that, that's a little more acceptable, like in the professional world. But if we're talking about high school and college, like we need to chill out a little bit with the pressure on winning,
Right.
from the coach's standpoint, and remember that these are kids. The majority of them won't go on to play in college or professionally, and how you treat them as people and how you help them grow as people is much more important than any outcomes that you get on the field,
Right.
right? And so I would say, like, bringing it back to those things, truly caring,
Yeah.
truly practicing love and joy, and seeing these athletes as people and not just you know pawns for you to try to win games.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the best coaches that you think of are the ones who care about their players.
Yeah.
And it must pain you to keep reference as an LSU guy to
uh,
reference Nick Saban, but yeah.
I've done my I've I've forgiven him, you know and we've come full circle now, and some of my friends or family or LSU alum with me, that
Mhm.
it might pain them more to hear what I have
Right.
to say, but I see it for what it is, and he's phenomenal, and I'm happy to give him his flowers. Now, what I won't do is praise Alabama, right?
Right.
I'll
Yeah.
praise Nick Saban, all the time, but Alabama, they still suck.
Well, yeah. I mean, he did bring LSU a national title, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then he left.
Right. Yeah.
That's why we hate him.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, let's kind of shelve this for until we can get together again because
yeah,
I think it's cool to release them like as an hour episode. But I mean, there's so much more to dive into, and I really appreciate the way you present the information. So uh, I would look forward to doing it again.
yeah. Thank you, Scott. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
like you mentioned, it's a very very deep field, and um,
Hmm.
we haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There are so many different mental skills and things to talk about from an individual
Uh-huh.
standpoint, from a team standpoint, coaching standpoint,
Hmm.
training, competing, so many different things to talk about. And yeah, I would love to come on again and talk
Okay.
more and dive into some different topics maybe and answer more
Yep.
questions that you might have. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it's awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, let's hit stop here.